What if the oldest memory of humanity is not about survival, but about supervision? Across the earliest written records on Earth, there appears a strange pattern. Not chaos, not primitive confusion, but hierarchy, administration, assigned roles. Ancient texts describe powerful beings who did not merely create the world, they managed it. They divided territories, they enforced laws, they demanded labor, and then they disappeared. But here is the deeper question. Why did the first civilization in recorded history describe its origins like a corporate structure? Why did humanity remember its beginning not as freedom, but as employment? Were these just myths meant to explain nature? Or are they fragments of a forgotten framework, one where humanity was not the first intelligence to organize this planet? Tonight, we examine not legends, but patterns. Welcome to Hidden Origins. Let's look beyond mythology and into the architecture of memory. In southern Mesopotamia, between two restless rivers, the first cities rose from mud and reed: Uruk, Eridu, Lagash. When archaeologists uncovered their tablets, they expected primitive stories, simple attempts to explain lightning, floods, and harvest cycles. Instead, they found bureaucracy. The earliest Sumerian records describe a structured order of powerful beings who governed specific domains: water systems, agriculture, metallurgy, law, even reproduction. These were not vague sky gods floating above reality. They were assigned administrators. Some texts speak of councils that deliberated. Others describe disputes between these beings. There were responsibilities delegated, territories distributed. The language is disturbingly practical. And here is what makes it remarkable. This administrative structure appears at the very dawn of writing itself. The first recorded civilization did not begin with philosophical wonder. It began with organizational memory. Why?
Urban civilization in Sumer did not slowly crawl toward complexity. Within a relatively short archaeological window, we see planned cities, monumental architecture, sophisticated irrigation, standardized trade systems, legal codes, stratified social classes. This level of coordination requires more than inspiration. It requires systemic control. Conventional history attributes this to gradual human innovation, and that explanation remains grounded in evidence. But the psychological framing within these ancient accounts suggests something deeper: the belief that order was introduced, not discovered. In several narratives, the powerful beings grow weary of labor, they seek assistance, and humanity emerges, not purely as a spiritual creation, but as a solution, a workforce. This idea is profoundly different from later theological traditions. It does not place humanity at the center of divine affection. Instead, it places humanity inside a system to sustain infrastructure, to cultivate land, to extract resources. If symbolic, what is being symbolized? Some scholars interpret these beings as personifications of natural forces. Others see them as reflections of priestly elites projecting authority backward into myth. But another possibility exists. What if these accounts preserve cultural memory of a transitional period when early human societies encountered a ruling class so advanced, so organized, that it appeared godlike? Not supernatural, simply superior. Anthropology shows us that technological gaps between civilizations can create the illusion of divinity. When isolated populations encountered advanced societies, they often interpreted technology as magic. Imagine such an encounter at the very dawn of organized settlement. Imagine early agricultural communities encountering a structured group possessing superior knowledge of irrigation, astronomy, metallurgy. How would that memory survive over millennia, perhaps as gods?
But what stands out most is not power, it is governance. These beings did not destroy randomly. They regulated, they assigned, they supervised. And then, according to multiple traditions, they withdrew. Not in chaos, in transition. Human kingship rises shortly after. The phrase repeated in Sumerian king lists is chillingly simple. Kingship descended from heaven. Not invented, descended. The implication is subtle but powerful. Authority did not originate with humans, it was transferred. Whether literal or metaphorical, this idea shaped the entire trajectory of civilization. Because once humanity believes authority comes from above, systems become sacred, and sacred systems are rarely questioned. But here is the tension. If these narratives are symbolic, they symbolize something very specific, the experience of being managed. If they are memory, they point to a forgotten hierarchy. And if they are psychological constructs, they reveal how early humanity perceived power as something external, elevated, and imposed. The foundation of the story is not about gods. It is about control. And control always leaves traces. We examine how this pattern spreads across cultures and why similar structures appear far beyond Mesopotamia. If this exploration challenges how you see ancient history, subscribe now to Hidden Origins. There is far more beneath the surface. Civilization did not remain confined to Mesopotamia. Across the ancient world, far beyond the Sumerian plains, we find something unsettlingly familiar. In Egypt, authority was not elected, it was divine. The pharaoh was not simply a ruler, he was the living bridge between heaven and earth. In Mesoamerica, powerful beings descended to shape humanity and then withdrew, promising eventual return. In parts of Africa and Asia, early kings traced their lineage to celestial ancestors. Different continents, different languages, same structural memory. Power descends, order is established, humanity serves, then the architects recede. This repeating framework demands attention, because myths evolve wildly across cultures, yet administrative hierarchy appears again and again. Why would early societies independently imagine that knowledge, law, and kingship came from above? Agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, and metallurgy did not emerge randomly. They appeared as integrated systems. Calendars aligned with celestial movements. Flood cycles were calculated. Trade routes expanded with remarkable precision. To ancient observers, such knowledge would appear not accidental, it would appear delivered. And when something is delivered, there must be a deliverer. But perhaps the more revealing question is psychological. What happens to a society when it believes its systems were established by higher intelligence? It stops questioning the foundation. The earliest temples were not simply places of worship, they were economic centers, storage facilities, administrative hubs, labor distribution points. Religion and governance were indistinguishable. The beings described in early narratives were often associated with specific industries: water management, fertility cycles, mining, craft production. Notice the pattern. infrastructure. This is not mythology obsessed with abstract spirituality. It is mythology obsessed with functionality. Even the act of human creation in these accounts carries operational logic. Humanity is fashioned because labor is required, not out of loneliness, not purely out of love, but necessity. Symbolic? Possibly, but symbolism reflects lived experience. Consider another angle. What if these stories encode a memory of elite groups, perhaps advanced for their time, whose centralized power and knowledge shaping early civilization from behind a veil of divinity? When literacy is restricted to a small class, information becomes sacred. When astronomical knowledge allows prediction of eclipses or floods, authority becomes supernatural. In such an environment, rulers do not need to claim they are powerful. They only need to claim they represent the powerful. The phrase "descended from heaven" may not describe physical arrival. It may describe ideological elevation. And yet, something remains unresolved. Why do so many early accounts include departure? Why emphasize that these beings once walked among humans, but no longer do? Departure narratives serve a purpose. They explain absence. If divine administrators once directly governed society, but no longer intervene visibly, their withdrawal must be addressed. Perhaps these stories mark the transition from direct centralized control to inherited kingship. Perhaps they reflect the fading of a priestly class that once held unmatched authority. Or perhaps, intriguingly, they encode humanity's growing independence. Because something changed. Over time, human rulers stopped presenting themselves as temporary stewards. They declared themselves absolute. The divine became distant. Kings became dominant. Authority no longer needed heavenly councils. It required armies. And that shift may be the most important clue of all. If early narratives reflect a period where governance felt imposed from above, later history reflects a period where governance became human ambition. The gods grew quieter. Empires grew louder. But echoes remain. The architecture of control, the idea that systems are inherited, sacred, unquestionable, originated somewhere. And the memory of beings who structured civilization did not disappear. It transformed. We confront the most controversial element of these ancient accounts, the idea of engineered humanity. Not as fantasy, but as metaphor, hypothesis, and the enduring fear that we may not be entirely self-made. If this journey is expanding how you think about ancient power structures, subscribe now to Hidden Origins. The deeper layers are still ahead. Among all the ancient accounts of early civilization, one idea remains the most provocative. Humanity was not simply created, humanity was modified. Several Mesopotamian narratives describe a moment when the burden of labor became unbearable for the ruling powers. The solution was not technological innovation, it was biological intervention. A being is fashioned from clay, mixed in some versions with the essence of a higher entity. The result is not a god, not an equal, a worker. On the surface, this sounds like mythological symbolism, clay representing earth, divine essence representing consciousness. But beneath the symbolism lies something psychologically revealing. Early humanity believed intelligence could be transferred, that consciousness could be engineered, that life itself could be shaped with intention. This is a remarkably advanced conceptual leap for the dawn of recorded history. The idea that humans were designed for purpose rather than emerging randomly appears repeatedly in different cultural frameworks. Sometimes humanity is created to relieve divine labor, sometimes to maintain balance, sometimes as intermediaries. But the pattern remains consistent. Function precedes freedom. If interpreted metaphorically, these stories may reflect a period when large populations were reorganized under strict labor systems, agriculture, construction, resource extraction. Human identity became tied to productivity. To describe such a transformation, myth may have encoded it as literal creation. Imagine early communities transitioning from small kin-based groups into massive organized workforces, constructing cities and irrigation networks. From their perspective, life itself would feel redesigned, roles assigned, tasks enforced, survival dependent on compliance. Such a shift could easily become mythologized as being made for work. But there is another layer to consider. The mixing of divine essence with clay suggests hierarchy embedded within humanity itself, a tiered origin, some closer to the gods, others further removed. This framework mirrors ancient class systems, rulers claiming partial divinity, priests claiming access to sacred knowledge, workers bound to earth. The myth does not simply explain existence, it justifies structure. And yet, woven into some of these narratives is tension. Humans are not entirely obedient. They multiply, they grow noisy, they disrupt balance. Creation becomes unpredictable. This theme is profound. If humanity was engineered for order but develops autonomy, the system destabilizes. Whether literal or symbolic, the story captures something timeless. Control systems eventually produce resistance. As societies grew, centralized authority required increasing enforcement. Flood myths, resets, divine punishments, these may reflect collective memory of social collapse, environmental disaster, or regime change. The gods become frustrated, not because humans sin, but because humans exceed control. This interpretation reframes the entire narrative. What if these ancient accounts are not describing extraterrestrial genetic engineers? What if they are describing the birth of structured civilization and the psychological shock that accompanied it? To be organized is to be limited. To be governed is to surrender some autonomy. Early humanity may have encoded that surrender as divine engineering.
But here is where the story becomes more unsettling. Even in modern times, the question of engineered life is no longer purely mythological. Genetic editing, artificial intelligence, synthetic biology. Humanity now possesses the ability to shape life intentionally. The ancient fear that intelligence can be modified, directed, designed has returned, not as legend, but as technology. Perhaps the true power of these ancient stories is not that they record forgotten gods. Perhaps they warn of a cycle. Every civilization that believes it has mastered creation eventually confronts the consequences of control. And maybe the departure of the gods symbolizes the moment when creators step back and their creations must govern themselves. If that is true, then humanity today stands in a position once attributed to divine beings, and that realization changes everything. We explore what happened after the architects vanished and why their absence may be the most important chapter of all. If this investigation is reshaping how you interpret ancient origins, subscribe now to Hidden Origins. The conclusion will tie the pattern together.
At some point in the ancient record, something shifts. The councils grow quiet. The direct supervision fades. The beings who once walked among cities retreat into distance. They do not vanish in chaos, they recede into myth, and humanity steps forward. This transition is subtle but monumental. Early narratives describe gods assigning kingship. Later records describe kings inheriting it. Over time, rulers no longer claim to be representatives of divine administrators. They claim to embody divinity itself. The intermediary disappears. Authority internalizes. This may be the most revealing development in the entire story. If we interpret the ancient accounts literally, the departure marks the end of a direct ruling presence. If we interpret them symbolically, it marks the maturation of civilization, the moment humans assume full control of their own systems. Either way, the result is the same. Responsibility shifts. When the architects are present, failure can be blamed upward. When they withdraw, accountability descends. The myth of vanished overseers may encode a psychological transformation, the acceptance that humanity must govern itself. But myths do not disappear simply because societies evolve. They adapt. The memory of higher authority lingers in religious structures, monarchies, and even modern institutions. Titles change, systems modernize, yet the architecture of legitimacy, power descending from an elevated source, remains deeply embedded in human consciousness. Why?
Because it provides stability. To believe that order originates from a higher intelligence is comforting. It suggests design rather than accident, purpose rather than randomness. Yet there is a paradox here. If humanity was engineered to serve, then autonomy is rebellion. If humanity was organized by superior intelligence, then innovation is defiance. And history shows a steady expansion of human agency. We question kings, we challenge institutions, we decode nature, we manipulate genetics. The species once described as clay mixed with divine essence now edits its own code. This may be the final inversion of the ancient narrative. Perhaps the story of celestial administrators was never about external beings. Perhaps it was about potential. In early civilization, intelligence seemed external, something granted. Over millennia, humanity gradually realized that intelligence resides within. The gods did not vanish, they became unnecessary. Or perhaps they were never literal rulers at all, but symbolic projections of a society encountering its first experience of structured power. When irrigation systems dictated survival, when astronomical cycles determined harvests, when centralized authority reorganized daily life, it may have felt as though unseen architects controlled reality. In truth, those architects were human, brilliant, strategic, authoritative, but human. And as knowledge spread, the aura of divinity faded. The narrative of engineered humanity may therefore serve as both origin story and warning. Every civilization constructs systems. Every system requires labor. Every labor structure risks reducing individuals to function. The ancient fear was not of gods. It was of losing autonomy within a design. Today, the context has changed, but the question remains hauntingly similar. As humanity builds artificial intelligence, modifies genomes, and constructs global infrastructures of control, we approach the very role once attributed to ancient overseers. If we create systems that organize life itself, who ensures those systems remain humane?
Perhaps the real legacy of the so-called empire of early administrators is not hidden technology or forbidden history. It is a philosophical mirror, a reminder that the line between creator and creation is thin, that power, once centralized, always seeks permanence, and that the most important transition in human history was not the arrival of rulers from the sky, but the moment humanity stopped looking upward for instruction and began looking inward for responsibility. The architects may have withdrawn from the stories, but the architecture remains, and now it belongs to us. If this full journey through ancient memory and modern meaning challenged your understanding of humanity's origins, subscribe to Hidden Origins, because the deepest questions are never about the past. They are about what we choose to become next.